Welcome to Retail Level Up's Moment with Mickey. In today's episode, we have a guest, Becky Walraed of So You Boutique in North Carolina. So here's a little bit of information about Becky. With 20 years of corporate retail experience behind her, she was ready for a journey that would bring her back to the community she and her daughter love and call home. The challenge was on to create a clothing boutique that offered a unique shopping experience, sincere personal service, quality on-trend fashion and accessories at a good price, and a curated line of home products. Through a lot of sweat and tears, So You Boutique was born. Becky has a love for fashion and entrepreneurship. She has worked for some great companies that believed in personal service, great product, and a great experience. And some of those names include Coldwater Creek, Talbot's, and Altered State. Most of her experience has been in multi-unit management. And one of Becky's guiding principles when it comes to the retail business is personal service is a lost art today, but it is something that is very dear to her heart. Welcome, Becky.
Thanks, Mickey. I'm glad to be here.
I am so excited to hear this story. We worked together for a number of years and we've always admired your management skills. And I just can't wait to hear how you created this store. But before we get into that, I'd like you to introduce yourself with a little bit more about your background and how you got to what you're doing today.
Okay. Well, I have been in retail for it's been 30 years now. Most of it has been multi-unit, more on the district level. And honestly, when the time came to weigh whether or not I take that next step or not, it was the time I looked at my career and said, maybe it's time for me to take a different road. So worked for some great companies. I know we worked together at Coldwater Creek. And so I have loved working for smaller companies, and I've worked for, a few mid-sized companies too, but small companies, you really got to see the entrepreneurships and what these owners had to do to start their company. They all had to start somewhere. So I think that's what was I was always intrigued with, how these owners started and what they had to go through and think about and their story along the way. So it gave me that encouragement along the way when I decided to make the leap. And I didn't make it until I was in my 50s. But, you kind of knew when it was time to go. And that's what I did. So it's been mostly in fashion retail, but I've worked in a little accessories, women fashion. I've worked with really all ages. So my background's pretty diverse as far as shoes, jewelry, clothing, working with the teenagers and working with moms, so it's pretty widespread in the knowledge that we have.
Yeah. And so was this something that you ventured out on your own to do, or did you take a partner?
No, I did it on my own.
All right. Wow. And did you have discussions with anyone, or was this all just your brainchild, but did you have anybody that you used as a mentor when you starting to think about it?
I had some DM partners that we talked about, what would be great. And one of the companies I worked for, which I really learned a lot from too, was probably the last leg, what I think that I needed to learn in the industry, but it was about branding. And, how do you do it a little differently? And how does the interior, the windows, as important as the customer service and the visual on the inside, but then how do you create an interest? And so I worked with some great talent that was very conceptual in merchandising. So there was no planograms, it was conceptual. And I think that's where I really learned a lot in the last part of my years as a district manager was, how do you take something and you create, that interest and, so learning those entrepreneurships and, so there was a lot of brainstorming back and forth with some partners that I had. And then I felt responsible that if I'm going to do this, then I felt responsible for the finances, that if I failed, then I failed. But if, it was, and I may take partners later on as it gets bigger, but I didn't want to be responsible for someone else's investment starting the business.
Okay.
So I just did it a little differently.
Yeah. And how did you decide on the type of store and the product that you wanted to include in there?
It really changed. When I first opened, I opened with the high school and college kid in mind, because it was the last company I worked for in that experience. And as we opened and I got to know my clientele a little bit more, I flipped and really started focusing more on the mom. And the more research that I did, there's a gap in the industry right now with 40 plus.
Yep.
So it was really getting to know the clientele here and where the void was at in this market. I live in a very nice area. Retail really hasn't landed really strong here. There's some locals here, but it's just a matter of time for corporate retailers because this area is growing so big, but it was my opportunity to jump in. And so the product line evolved, and it continues to evolve as, I learn more about the customer.
So interesting. And that's a key, I think, is paying attention to what your customer is telling you.
It was, it was within 3 months, I was pretty much moving in a different direction pretty quickly.
Wow. So did you start selling your products online right when you opened?
It was about 8 months later, because I'm more grounded in brick and mortar, because that's been my background. So brick and mortar was very familiar to me. The online was a whole different ballgame. And it was something that, I had to learn along the way. So even before the pandemic, we were just sort of getting our online going. So the pandemic, we probably weren't as good in position as we should have been because we didn't have that presence online yet. And we're still today building it. I'm still probably 80-90% brick and mortar, 10 to 20% in the online. The couple platforms that I'm using now it's revving us up quicker. Yeah. So I hope that flips. In my business plan, I would really like to be 30 to 40% at least online, and at one point get to 50 with brick and mortar, the other 50. But I think with the way the pandemic and everything has really, people have focused more with online selling. Yeah, it's going to be important for the business.
Definitely. And how did you select your location for your brick and mortar store?
We had a successful retailer that was in this spot. And when I jumped in with a pretty hefty, 5,400 square feet. So I didn't open as your normal small boutique. I'm like, if we're going to go for it, we're going to go for it. And, she was a very successful, this previous retailer, and she had just moved her location to a bigger spot. And I felt like that was the opportunity to jump in. It was already, I just did some interior, renovations in the store, but the build out was pretty much there. And then I just had to get my name out in the community.
Yeah. As I've done these interviews, it's a repeat success story is that they waited for the right location. And that sounds like it was working for you too.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So do you have a plan for the number of stores that you're going to have?
Right now, if I probably would have started this venture 10 years ago, I don't know how many stores I would have tried to open. But I think, at this point in my life, if, I really am focusing on building a bigger online, the online presence and seeing how we can grow both of those. And considering if I take partners on, maybe a second location, but I'm not sure at this age if I really want to go 10 to 15, 20 stores. I think in my younger years, I would have totally done it.
Yeah. That balance and quality of life is calling.
It is. But brick and mortar is a different animal today, too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So tell me about that. How is it different from before?
I think when, if you've been in retail for over 30 years, the brick and mortar was really strong. And you could see even in the last 10 years where it's brick and mortar was starting to soften a little bit and online was gaining a bigger presence. And now that I think with the pandemic, people have become much more comfortable ordering online, so I think it's really going to continue to really move in that direction. I think brick and mortar still has a place.
Yep.
But I think it's going to really take both, in today's industry.
Yeah.
It's just very different. But I have a lot of customers who still want to touch it. They want to try it on. They love the personal service, the wardrobing, how to fit body types. And that's harder to get. The lives that we do on Facebook gives a little bit more where people can see how things fit because they still want that interaction. It's interesting how the industry is just changing. And now it's really about online personally selling. You're not just ordering off a website, but these lives, or even for big corporations, are becoming more and more important. So they're connecting, with the brand.
Yeah. So interesting. So what kind of marketing did you do in the beginning?
I didn't at the beginning. It was just all social media, and it was just more organic. And, as I look back, on, because that's probably my biggest challenge is with the marketing and really establishing where people can find us.
Mm-hmm.
So, I took it a little bit slow, and I wanted to make sure the brand was a little bit more situated as we were evolving the brand.
Right.
And this year, we're just now launching more of online or advertising. And I'm still sticking to mostly social media advertising. We're looking at some Google, but I feel like the platform that we're using, it's more conducive right now to Facebook and Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like now's the time to really start really pushing out the marketing. But it was more word of mouth in the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
and working the kinks out. And now I feel confident that the advertising dollars are going to pay off more.
Now, which platforms do you use for social media?
We use Facebook mostly because I
Mhm.
think it fits our demographic more, but Instagram is right there. We have a platform called Comment Sold, and it is they really work closely with Facebook. So in fact, we have our app now, we have our website through this platform, and I just switched over all of it probably within the last couple of months. We were trying out Comment So, but that's where we do our Facebook lives. And that I was seeing a lot of momentum build in some retailers that just small boutiques that I was just tracking. And they were building up pretty quickly with the Facebook lives through Comment Sold. So I just started researching because I kept hearing some of my vendors tell me that this is a platform that everybody was doing really well with. And when I started just kind of watching them, you could see that they were revving up pretty fast on it. And we're seeing quite a big, my build faster through this platform.
Mm-hmm. And are you attracting beyond, your local market in the North Carolina area? Are you seeing interest across the country?
I think that's where we have probably our biggest opportunity. I see what it's building is more local right now, but we're focused more locally. Traffic is where I'm kind of targeting my marketing.
Mm-hmm.
And then once I think that we've kind of started getting some really more traction there, we will expand out more.
Awesome. Okay. So tell me about your buying process. Do you go to market?
I do. I usually go 4 or 5 times a year, and Atlanta is our closest market.
Okay.
And I do a lot of online ordering too. So I spend quite a few hours a week just looking for unique product. And I really prefer where we've done the best is I picked up a couple European brands.
Oh.
So I'm still trying to research just because they're not, they're a little bit more unique, a little different. We're more casual in our collection that we have. I carry a few dresses, but it's more to the casual side. And we've had some fun with some lines from Italy, and I just picked up one from France. So now I'm really on a search and I'm going to have to probably branch out to California or New York to find a few more unique vendors, because that's really where I try to focus on, is the uniqueness of it.
Sure. Okay. And how do you protect your business by not going too deep with a particular vendor? Do you have kind of a formula that you use that you just, keep track of not putting too many eggs in one basket?
That's been a challenge, and even through the pandemic, because a lot of there wasn't as many products as produced. So there was kind of a backlog a little bit. So there's a little bit of challenge I just ran into. So I was really probably over assorted with one brand, but that was we were set. We couldn't keep it, and I still can't keep it. A lot of times I still got it back ordered. But it made me really nervous. So I feel really good going into this fall that we're a little bit more diversified. But I probably carry 10 to 15 different vendors. I probably got to one vendor was doing probably more 50, 60%, which was a little bit too much of where I wanted to rely on one vendor.
Sure. Yeah. So do you have, tell me, what are the product categories? You do apparel, accessories, some home decor.
Yes.
Is that?
And we do some shoes.
Okay.
Which we're kind of playing around with that. And, I carried more when we first opened, and then it was really trying to get the product mixed right more in the clothing, because I could see our online presence picking up. And so most of my focus became more of the clothing items. But for a brick and mortar, we do well with some home and some just fun giftable items.
Sure. Okay. Now, when you started, before you opened, did you sit down and write a business plan?
I did. It was part
Okay.
of my loan process, which was a great experience to go through.
Mm-hmm.
And I still pull back at the business plan and keep updating it now. It's interesting because it was more focused on brick and mortar when I first wrote the business plan, and now as I've kind of studied the business, it's going to be moving more toward the online, and then just the product mix too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And do you have a mission statement?
Really, I think from even like the Coldwater Creek days, and it's so ingrained, and even my background of most of the retailers have always been strong customer service. So I'm a really, really big believer in customer service. So it's really, I still say doing what's right for the customer and giving them a uniqueness. I mean, in the store, we have like bed frames hanging from the ceiling. So it's very eclectic. So when people walk in, it's a little bit like mini little anthropology in a way of just how do you create all senses to her, like the visual, the customer service, the music. So it's about the entirety of the experience. So I guess if we stand for anything, I don't returns, it's doing what's right for the customer. If something it's not to her satisfaction, then I go back to my Coldwater Creek days so I'm still very branded there.
Yeah.
And I think our mission statement is, I believe in taking care of her.
Mm-hmm. And that is, gosh, that's the niche that retail brick and mortar has now, because it's really all about the experience.
It
And
is.
the cookie cutter, sure, they can go, to the chain and know that they're going to get, okay quality, and they know that the price is going to be good, but nobody helps them. Nobody cares about them to the level of what you can deliver.
Yeah.
And it really makes a difference.
Where I would like to play with a little bit, and it's just, I keep, the thing that I think I learned in the business was you had to get comfortable. The first year was to be comfortable with the unknown, because when you're in corporate, you're pretty much laid out. And in here, you're like, whoo, there's a lot of obstacles that come your way, and you've got to get comfortable with, you believe in what you're doing, but you're a new business and you're still filling out, where it's going, so once you get over the fear of the unknown, and then sometimes as a new business, you're like, just keep moving, just, I don't believe you can stay stagnant. So it was like, we do a website. Now we're going to go live. Now we're looking at virtual shopping. How do we start to implement that? So I think that's probably one of the biggest lessons, where you just don't know where it's going to, it's just keep moving forward,
right,
rather than just letting things happen, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
If you get thrown COVID, okay, well, it is what it is. How are we going to overcome it?
Right. Get comfortable with change.
Because there's a lot of, successful online businesses that did really well through COVID. So, we had to just adjust the business model a little bit.
Right. So would you share what tools you use specifically on the technical side that support the various parts of your business? Now, you've already mentioned Comment Sold as the platform to help you with Facebook and selling there. But because customer service is so important to you, do you have a customer relationship management system?
We have a program that we track, all our purchases, and we have set up some client books. It's probably an opportunity that we have as I keep looking at this next stage. If you look at, your Stitch Fixes and where we can go. So we are just now putting together templates and I'm looking into how can we expand that virtual shopping. And, so that one's probably not tightened up. It's probably my next agenda, because I think there's a lot of opportunity in appointment selling and clienteling virtually.
Right.
So looking at different platforms for that. One we do really well with, I said, is Comment Sold in the Facebook Lives. We have a POS system then that's pretty sophisticated. It tracks to all the inventory and our customer purchases, so it can do quite a bit on just the POS system that we have.
And can you share what that is?
It's Vend, V-E-N-D. They're based out of Canada, actually.
Yep, I've heard of them. Okay. And then what platform do you use for online sales? Is it Comment Sold, or is it something else with your website?
It was Shopify, and I was duplicating, Comment Sold had the same capabilities. So for right now, I went to Comment Sold. As we get bigger, it will probably go back to Shopify. I think they offer a little bit more bells and whistles. But I think I was duplicating is what I was doing, because we had to upload in two different sites with the app. The app was more user-friendly with Comment Sold with what we already started. So my decision to go to that platform, even online, was based more of just getting it down to one system rather than trying to upload two different sites.
Sure. Yeah. And when you built your website initially, what website builder did you use?
Actually, I went through Shopify, and I actually learned to build it myself.
Uh-huh.
So when I have gone through a lot of technology, but it's really helped. Like even when I flipped over to this one, when it made me more familiar with the site. And, but they make it pretty easy these days. I mean, they kind of walk you right through once you kind of get through the initial learning curve of it.
Yeah. And what merchant service do you use for credit card processing?
I just switched to a company called Spot On. I was with WorldPay.
Okay.
And both of them are pretty competitive. I fortunately, because that really wasn't my background, but learned very quickly that there's a big differences in the credit card processing and different rates.
Yes.
And WorldPay, I had actually negotiated a pretty good rate. And so they were pretty hard to beat. And then I had somebody local that was supporting this other company, and they were close. They were right there with saving a little bit of money and Spot On. So they're both really good companies.
Got it. Okay. So how many employees do you have?
I have 6 right now.
Okay. Yeah. And do you manage the employee part, the HR part of the business yourself, or do you engage a third-party service to help you, like with the legal requirements and the paperwork and all that?
Right now, I do it all myself. I do QuickBooks, they have the capabilities of the scheduling and the payroll services.
Okay.
So that makes it easy with just, the taxes and all of that and the payroll. But it's pretty much at this point, we're still using the smaller systems, until we get bigger.
Okay. So what was the most surprising thing you discovered when you opened your store?
I think it was the patience. Because you had to learn everything. I mean, so before, when you had support, for corporate, you always could call, you can call the POS department and say, hey, I need some help with this. And then now you're learning yourself and going, okay, you're troubleshooting quite a bit. So probably getting caught up on the technology was my biggest, that and the marketing. The rest of it, the store part of it, was a piece of cake to me, because that's pretty much my background. And, the buying was kind of new to me. So it was getting caught up on those things and making adjustments along the way. But I think my biggest learning was through the technology was by far. And just having no fear, you just had to jump in, and, you didn't have anybody to call anymore. So you had to go in and just really, that was probably the biggest learning curve. And just having confidence and faith that you were on the right path. If we just keep moving and keep, I never was satisfied in just staying stagnant. So that probably what kept the business, growing even through, the whole pandemic.
One of the toughest transitions, I think, is for someone who has always worked for someone else or for a company, and then decide to go out on your own, have your own business. You're your own boss. Now, you've touched on this a couple of times, that you just keep one step, just keep taking that next step. But it's challenging being your own boss. Really challenging.
It is.
And what tips can you share that you have learned about yourself that helps you stay focused and stay motivated to do all those parts that you really don't like to do?
I will say, just even doing lives, I wasn't really keen on, like, okay, we have to go, and it was essential for the business. So you push through it. I mean, it's something that, as a mindset, and there's days that are easier than others. That some days you're like, I've got this. And there's other days that it's just really tough. And then I may read a motivational book or pick it up, and, I look back at all the people who've been successful, and I just think, they were successful. So if they can do it, I can do it. And, so it's just not giving in. And I would say there's probably been more positive days, but there's times that, you question it. Am I doing the right thing? Did I do the right thing? And then, if you keep moving, you start seeing the traction. And people would tell me literally that to be patient, it would take 3 years.
Okay.
Before you really start to see the build. And I think that was excluding a pandemic.
Yes.
So I just happened to start a new business right in the middle, right before the pandemic started. So, the timing of that was a little bit more challenging, but I can start for the first time. I'm really starting to see some traction starting to really build. But you're right. There's days that it gets tough. I have people, ask me all the time, "Oh, you're the owner." Yes, I'm the owner. Yes, I'm the buyer. I'm the janitor, the bookkeeper. But it's exciting. It's an exciting journey.
And what was the date that you first opened?
It was in March. No, it's June because I took over the space, but end of May of 2019.
Okay. Okay. So you had several months that you were open before you had to do the shutdown.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what are your top tips, the do's and don'ts that you would like to share with the audience that might be thinking about starting their own retail business?
Obviously the research, right? And before you start a business, there's just so much that goes into it. And I think the corporate background did prepare me for that because, we dealt with things on a multi-unit level of the intricacies that went into it. So, I think I was very planned out in initiating the business. So there was a lot of research that went in. So, owning a business is not always for the faint of heart. It's a huge commitment. And, you can't really underestimate the commitment behind it and the long hours and, what it takes to really get a business going. And I would say, I have had great mentors along the way too. Sometimes, I'll pick up the phone and just call one of those mentors, who has also offered some great advice. And, and I say, don't give up. I mean, it's just in research, I constantly was researching what was working in other businesses, more small businesses than corporate, because we were on a different scale than a corporate business. So I studied a lot of small boutiques. And, I would look at their websites. I would look at what they were doing, with their marketing, studying their social media, looking at kind of the traction you could see even a lot on Facebook Lives, what kind of traction they get. So that was probably more than anything, was just looking at how businesses are successful. And knowing that, they got there. So it was just a lot of research. Even when you think you open the doors and people will just come, and, it just takes time. So I would say, don't give up, but, there's a lot of successful people out there and, mentors and organizations like yourself to really help when you get stuck. When I first started social media marketing, I'm like, you have to treat me like a first grader kindergartner, because I really didn't even understand the language because I wasn't strong in social media. And, when I look at the time now and a year and a half later, it's like, I could know now what questions to ask when I talk to a marketing firm, know where my blind spots were.
Right.
And, but it took, because you're saturated. Your brain's always saturated with new things. And when my brain was ready to take on a different learning, then I would start diving into that. But it's my brain would only let me absorb so much at one time. And then now I would say, when you get your systems down and all of that, I'm probably more complete now in the overall part of the business than at the beginning in marketing and, looking at new things like clienteling, platforms and where we can go next. So I would just say, keep doing and be patient. You're going to go through a learning curve.
Yes. Yes.
And I think it's the learning curves that, when you look back, no matter what the journey is, I look back and probably have learned the most in the last year, 2 years, but my prior retail has really helped me. But, it's been amazing on the things that you didn't think you could do before that you learn how to do.
Yes. Yeah. Keep learning, stretching, growing. When we stop doing that, that's when we start to die.
Yeah, I agree.
So one thing that is not on my list of questions that I was going to ask you, but it kind of came up as we were talking about all the different things that you're doing. Do you have a calendar that you plan out when you're going to be doing certain activities in the week or the month?
I do. And that's becoming, much more prevalent now because, we're sending out more email campaigns. I do even a lot of my photo shoots, a lot of times too. So in our Facebook Lives, where we were doing one a week, how do we now do more? So, and then just even getting on a calendar of, you got your holidays coming up, the first year, what promotions do you run? So it kind of takes that history of the first year. And then once you start getting some more history, the calendar becomes more and more important, because you've got so many more things going on. And, there's a time where, when do you hire? And I got to a point where I built a big enough complex model for a small business, doing it on my own. When you're trying to do the website, you're doing a lot of photo shoots. Now we're doing the lives, so it's not just opening a brick and mortar store anymore.
Right.
And, you could feel when you're like, okay, is this the tipping point? And the tipping point is, when you got to get traction through it all too. So it's a very fine balance of, when you put more payroll on and, taking the risk on getting the business going.
Right. Right. Yeah. Always a balancing act. So just rattle off a couple of your key performance indicators that you pay attention to on a regular basis.
Yeah, mine is a lot of traffic. I'd say in a small boutique, though, different from probably what I was in corporate, because you had so many more footsteps walking in. So with ours is really probably more like your average tran. We do, I may run more like about 120 average tran, where in corporate retail, we probably don't see it as high. The traffic, I may look at my conversion now. I'm starting to pay attention to, as I'm doing into advertising, is if they're seeing the ad, how many clicks are we getting back over? So those are things that we'll get more into that reporting. But in the store, it's, how we measure our quality of selling, with the customer, which is probably my biggest indicator here, just because, traffic's a little bit slower. Okay.
And training, certainly you must have expectations that when you bring your employees in, that the way that they're going to be greeting and the way that they're taking care of the customer and adding on and making suggestions. So that's an ongoing process, right?
It is. I mean, it's, we run a pretty tight team, and most of my team's been with me since we've been opened. So, a lot of them have that experience. And it's just, when you're in a smaller community, it's really about the connection with the community and the customer. So it's really building the relationships. So that's a lot of it. And then the product knowledge, which is, really, I think the biggest thing for my employees more than anything was, especially with them working with 40 plus, in the 40 to 65 range, is how to wardrobe body types. Because women of our age, have just, I can understand that, being in this age group is, this particular silhouette's going to fit best on this body type. So there's a lot of training on that. We try everything on when it comes in. So we have a good, we can represent pretty much all sizes in the store. So, we know how it's fitting this size customer. And I think that's the biggest thing we offer is, I can tell a customer pretty much where to go to when they come in, and you ask a few questions, but from a body type, what's going to probably look best on her. So we do a lot of training on that.
Awesome. Okay. Well, any other final tips, do's or don'ts that you want to share?
No, I just think it's, it's a really, people don't know when to leave. Sometimes there's a leap, and when they start a small business, and, you're always questioning when that time is to leap. And when the research I was doing is just different for different people. We had a little personal strategy that happened in my daughter's life, and it really is what made me make the decision. She lost one of her best friends in a car accident, and she was a junior at the time. And, I was doing a little bit of traveling as a single mom. So that was really a big decision on also getting connected in the community, was also how could I be home more, for my daughter and not on the road all the time. So there's just so many avenues. And I just, say, gosh, if you go for it, it's keep learning and just keep smiling every day and enjoy the journey. That's what people would tell me. Even when it got stressful, it's, I would remind myself just to try to enjoy the journey through it all, and just appreciate the opportunity for it. So
that's great. Good advice. Great tips. And I loved hearing your story. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Mickey. I appreciate the opportunity.
And now for our audience, if they want to go shopping, they can look you up. What's your website address?
We are So You Boutique, NC as in NorthCarolina.com. Or you can find us on Facebook. Same thing. Watch us every Thursday, and we'll give you a live fashion show.
Awesome. All right. And your brick and mortar store is located in
Wake Forest, North Carolina.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Becky.
Thank you, Mickey. I appreciate it.
All right. Take care.
Okay, we'll talk to you soon.